The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays across the small community playground. Laughter echoed faintly from children swinging and sliding, but near the far corner, a quiet figure sat alone. Lily, my 8-year-old daughter, traced slow circles on the padded surface with her fingers. Her wheelchair sat beside her, its wheels still. This was her favorite time of day, when the playground was nearly empty and the noise wasn't overwhelming. Her condition made these moments of gentle solitude rare and precious. I watched from a nearby bench, letting her have her space, grateful for a small patch of normalcy in a world that often wasn't kind. That's when she appeared. Karen. Immaculately coiffed, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed high on her head like a crown. She zeroed in on Lily as if spotting a violation that must be eradicated. Without greeting or hesitation, she strode across the playground, heels clacking against the rubber matting. "You can't be here if you're not actively using the equipment," she snapped, voice cutting through the air like a whip. Lily looked up, startled, unsure how to respond. Her speech was slow, her understanding sometimes delayed. Karen didn't wait. "You're loitering. That's against HOA regulations." I was on my feet in an instant, pulse hammering. "She's not loitering. She's playing in her own way." Karen smirked. "Rules are rules." From her clipboard, she produced a slip, a fine notice. $100 for loitering," she said with icy satisfaction, slapping it onto Lily's wheelchair handle. My daughter's lip quivered. I met Karen's gaze, fury rising, but held it back. Not here. Not now. As she turned and walked away, victorious, she never once looked back. And she clearly had no idea that the mother of the girl she'd just fined served in the United States Senate. They say power can make people small or make them kind. I'd spent much of my life trying to choose the latter. Public service wasn't something I'd ever imagined when I was young, a daughter of a high school teacher and a mechanic from a small town in Virginia. But life has a way of pulling you along currents you never expected. I fought for every inch of my education, then for my place in law, and eventually for my seat in the United States Senate. Still, despite all that, my proudest role was mother to my daughter, Lily. Lily came into this world fighting. Born at 26 weeks, she weighed less than 2 pounds. The doctors prepared us for the worst, but Lily had other plans. Through months of intensive care, surgeries, and sleepless nights, we learned just how fierce our tiny daughter could be. Cerebral palsy followed, a diagnosis that both shattered and shaped our lives. She would never walk unaided. Speech came haltingly, with therapy and patience. But what Lily lacked in physical ease, she made up for with a heart that radiated warmth and a quiet, stubborn strength that left many adults in awe. When I was elected to the Senate, I moved us to this gated community just outside of Washington, D.C. It was close enough to commute, but far enough to give Lily some semblance of normalcy. The neighborhood had wide sidewalks for her wheelchair, a lovely, accessible playground, and quiet streets. It seemed ideal. I'd made a deliberate choice to keep our private lives shielded. Few here knew my title. I wanted to be Mom at home, not Senator. We attended local events, baked cookies for school fundraisers, and kept our heads down in the complex where HOA politics often overshadowed true community spirit. And that spirit was often stifled by Karen. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a stickler for minutiae and a master of wielding the rulebook like a weapon. She'd fined neighbors for garden gnomes, issued warnings about the shade of front doors, and even once called animal control on a family's therapy dog. People grumbled but complied. Easier to pay a fine than to provoke her relentless pursuit of order. Until now, we had mostly escaped her notice. Lily loved the playground, a small patch of freedom in her otherwise challenging world. I always kept a watchful eye nearby, allowing her those moments of independence. She wasn't climbing slides or racing swings, but she was present, absorbing the sunlight and the sounds, connecting in her own way. It brought her joy. So when Karen stormed in that day, clipboard ready to strike, she wasn't just attacking a child at play. She was attacking the fragile sanctuary we had built. One hard-earned moment of normal in a life that required so much more patience and grace than most could fathom. And in doing so, she had unknowingly started a battle she would never forget. The HOA in our community was an entity that seemed to exist solely to remind residents of its power. Established when the neighborhood was first developed, it had started with noble intentions, maintaining the beauty and harmony of the place we called home. But over time, as often happens, it morphed into something far less benevolent. Rules were enforced with increasing rigidity, fines became more frequent, and board meetings felt more like tribunals than neighborly gatherings. The bylaws read like a legal treatise, thick with language that allowed broad interpretation, a fact Karen had mastered. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, and if you asked her, she would proudly tell you she had single-handedly preserved its prestige. She held no official office in the community outside of being a board member, yet somehow managed to operate as though she were its mayor, judge, and enforcer all in one. Her presence was unmistakable. She dressed as if she were heading to a country club, even when walking her dog, her lips often pressed into a tight line of disapproval. Her obsession with order was legendary. Christmas decorations that stayed up a day past the deadline earned warning letters. One neighbor's American flag, hung a few inches too low, prompted a citation. Children's chalk drawings were power washed away under her supervision. It wasn't that the community lacked beauty, it lacked joy. Karen thrived on compliance. To her, each infraction was a personal affront, each resident a potential threat to her curated vision of suburban perfection. She had a way of twisting the rules to fit her narrative, citing obscure clauses to justify her actions. Many neighbors had learned to tread carefully around her, weary of the drama that often followed even the smallest confrontation. I had kept my distance, knowing that any engagement would likely spiral into an exhausting, pointless battle. We maintained our home impeccably and followed the guidelines. I saw no need to invite unnecessary conflict, but beneath her veneer of authority, Karen nursed a need for control that bordered on pathological. It wasn't enough for her to enforce the rules. She needed to be seen enforcing them, to establish dominance. It was this need that led her to target Lily. To Karen, the sight of a child sitting quietly in a wheelchair on the playground wasn't a moment of innocence or resilience. It was a breach of her meticulously maintained order. The idea that anyone could occupy space without her approval grated against every fiber of her being. What she failed to understand was that not everyone in this community was powerless, nor willing to be cowed. Until now, I had stayed silent, content to let her pettiness roll off our backs. But there are moments in life when silence becomes complicity, when protecting what matters most requires standing up and making your voice heard. Karen had unknowingly crossed that line, and the fallout was about to reach far beyond her carefully controlled world. It had been a warm Saturday afternoon, one of those rare days when my schedule allowed me to be fully present. Senate hearings, committee meetings, and travel often kept me away from home, but today was ours. I promised Lily we would visit the playground after lunch, and she had been buzzing with anticipation all morning. For her, simple outings held a magic that many take for granted. We packed her favorite sensory toys, a bottle of water, and sunblock before heading out. The playground wasn't busy, which was ideal. Too many kids and too much noise could overwhelm her, but a few familiar faces brought comfort. As we arrived, I helped her out of the car and into her chair, then guided her to her usual spot under the shade of an old oak tree near the swings. The ground was covered in soft, rubberized padding that made it easier for her chair to move. We set up her toys and let her explore textures and sounds, her eyes sparkling with delight. I settled onto a nearby bench, grateful for the moment of peace. A couple of children played nearby, their parents chatting quietly. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting playful patterns on the ground. Lily began to hum softly, her fingers running over the bumpy surface of a toy caterpillar. She loved this space, not because she could run or climb, but because it belonged to her as much as to any child. That serenity was shattered by the sharp sound of heels striking the mat. Karen strode into view, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield of righteousness. Her eyes swept the playground and locked onto Lily with predatory precision. Without acknowledging the other families, she made a beeline toward my daughter. I rose, already uneasy, and moved closer. Karen's voice rang out, brittle and cold. "This area is for active play only. You can't just sit here." Lily froze, startled by the sudden confrontation. Her speech didn't come easily when she was anxious, and the confusion in her wide eyes made my heart ache. I reached her side. "She's not just sitting," I said, keeping my voice calm. "She's playing in her way." Karen sniffed. "She's loitering. The HOA bylaws clearly state that the playground is for children actively using the equipment. If she can't use it properly, she can't be here." I stared at her in disbelief. "She is using it properly. For her." I gestured to the toys, the space she occupied with such care. "There's no rule against being present." Karen's lips curled in a thin smile. "Rules are rules." From her clipboard, she extracted a pre-filled violation slip and with theatrical precision slapped it onto the armrest of Lily's wheelchair. $100, payable within 10 days, or additional penalties will apply. Lily's lower lip trembled. She looked up at me, searching for understanding in a situation that defied reason. I knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart. You've done nothing wrong." Karen stood there, watching us as though expecting compliance. I met her gaze, anger simmering beneath my steady expression. "You are out of line," I said quietly. "This is discriminatory." She arched a brow. "Take it up with the board." With that, she spun on her heel and strode away, radiating triumph. Around us, the playground had gone eerily silent. Parents who had witnessed the scene exchanged uneasy glances but remained rooted in place, wary of drawing Karen's ire. I gathered Lily's toys and lifted her gently into her chair, her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "Why was that lady mean to me?" she whispered. I kissed her forehead. "Because sometimes people don't understand, but we'll make it right." As we wheeled away, I glanced at the slip still pinned to the chair. The fine was an insult, but the principle it violated ran far deeper. Karen might have thought she had won a small victory. What she didn't know was that the battle was only beginning, and this time she had chosen the wrong opponent. Back at home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken emotion. Lily had retreated to her room, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, a quiet signal that she needed time to process. I gave her space but checked in frequently, each time greeted by a small nod that told me she was okay, if only barely. For my part, I paced the kitchen, the fine notice clenched in my hand, its absurdity and cruelty amplifying with every glance. I knew the bylaws of the HOA as well as anyone. There was no provision that defined a disabled child's presence at the playground as loitering. This was no mere misunderstanding. It was targeted, an abuse of authority fueled by ignorance and a thirst for control. The impulse to confront Karen directly burned hot, but I knew better. Reacting emotionally would only give her more power. This required precision. I sat down with my laptop and began documenting everything. The time of the incident, the wording of the violation, witnesses present, the fact that Lily's disability was protected under both the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, both of which explicitly prohibit discrimination in housing-related services and public spaces managed by private entities like an HOA. With each line I typed, my anger gave way to focus. Years of legislative work had taught me the value of a measured, strategic response. This wasn't about $100. It was about ensuring that my daughter, and any child like her, would never be made to feel lesser or excluded or shamed for existing in a space meant for joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily emerged from her room, her eyes red but determined. She climbed into my lap and rested her head against my chest. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. "No, sweetheart," I whispered, holding her close. "We're going to fix this." I spent the rest of the evening preparing a formal complaint to the HOA board, citing the specific legal protections Karen had violated. I included references to past cases, language from the Department of Justice, and a polite but firm demand for an immediate retraction of the fine and a public apology. When the document was complete, I reviewed it once more, ensuring that every word reflected the gravity of the situation without tipping my hand regarding my professional standing. I wanted this to be about justice, not leverage. Yet I knew that if leverage became necessary, I had more than enough. I printed the letter and set it beside my briefcase, ready to deliver first thing in the morning. As I turned out the lights and carried Lily to bed, I kissed her forehead and whispered a promise. No one would make her feel small in her own community again. Karen had crossed a line, and she had no idea just how far I was prepared to go to defend the child who meant more to me than any title or position ever could. Morning brought a thin veil of calm, but beneath it, a quiet storm was gathering. I delivered the formal complaint to the HOA office first thing, ensuring it was time-stamped and copied to every board member. As I left, I noticed Karen lingering near the front entrance, speaking with a cluster of her usual allies. Their laughter stopped when I walked past, her gaze following me with a knowing smirk. Later that afternoon, word of the playground incident began to ripple through the neighborhood. Our HOA had an official Facebook group, but the real action happened in a private offshoot page that Karen effectively controlled. That was where she chose to air her version of events. A screenshot of her post was forwarded to me by a sympathetic neighbor. Some parents believe their children are exempt from the rules, it began. Yesterday I had to issue a citation for loitering at the playground, a space designed for active play. It is my duty as a board member to ensure our community standards are upheld, no matter how difficult certain conversations may be. She included a thinly veiled jab. We must resist the urge to let emotion cloud our judgment when it comes to preserving the integrity of our shared spaces. All residents should be treated equally under the law. No special exceptions. Reading it, my jaw tightened. The post reeked of smug self-satisfaction, carefully crafted to position herself as the tireless defender of order while subtly discrediting me as an overprotective, unreasonable parent. The comments beneath ranged from fawning praise to hesitant agreement, with a few brave souls questioning the fairness of the fine. Karen replied to each dissenting voice with clipped, patronizing responses, reinforcing her version of events. What struck me most was her confidence. She truly believed she was in the right and that no one could challenge her authority. She had no inkling of the legal jeopardy she had placed herself and the HOA in. Nor did she seem to suspect that the parent she had targeted wasn't some ordinary suburban mother afraid to speak up. The more Karen doubled down, the more resolute I became. Her arrogance was her greatest weakness. The law was on my side, and soon so would be public opinion. But I knew the next move had to be measured. This wasn't about crushing her personally. It was about defending my daughter and ensuring no other family would face such treatment. For the rest of the day, I watched and waited. More neighbors reached out privately, offering support and sharing their own frustrations with Karen's reign. It was clear that beneath the surface, the community was growing restless. They needed a voice to stand up against the pettiness that had festered unchecked for too long. Karen had chosen the wrong child, the wrong mother, and the wrong fight. The next steps would be deliberate and decisive. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed with an extra long hug and one of her favorite bedtime stories, I returned to my study. The HOA's response deadline loomed, and the situation demanded a stronger, more strategic escalation. My formal complaint had been submitted, but Karen's smug online posts and the whispers spreading through the neighborhood told me she had no intention of backing down voluntarily. She was banking on intimidation and public posturing, assuming I'd quietly fold. But I didn't rise to the Senate by shrinking from bullies. I had spent years learning how to navigate battles of power and principle. This was no different, only this time it was personal. I opened my laptop and drafted a second letter, this one addressed directly to the entire HOA board, with Karen explicitly copied. I kept my tone professional but firm, referencing the original complaint and adding pointed legal citations. I reminded them that as a federally protected individual under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, Lily's right to access community spaces without discrimination was not up for debate. I included language from precedent cases where HOAs had faced costly legal consequences for similar violations. Then I added a paragraph that subtly revealed the depth of my legal knowledge and experience, without explicitly mentioning my role as a US Senator. I referenced my familiarity with federal enforcement mechanisms and my professional relationships with several organizations that specialize in ADA litigation. The message was clear: this was not a fight they could win, and escalation on their part would only worsen their exposure. Before sending it, I forwarded a draft to a trusted colleague from my Senate legal team, an expert in disability rights. Her reply came quickly. "It's airtight. You're giving them every chance to do the right thing. If they don't, we'll be ready." I clicked send. The next morning I received confirmation that the email had been delivered. By noon I heard from a neighbor who attended the impromptu HOA meeting that had been called to discuss the situation. Word was spreading fast. Board members were concerned, not just about potential legal exposure, but about the sudden realization that they might be facing someone with considerable legal and political influence. Karen's reaction, however, was predictably stubborn. In the meeting, she reportedly dismissed my letter as an overreaction and insisted that the rules must apply equally to everyone. Her pride wouldn't allow her to back down, even as her peers grew visibly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. One board member, an older gentleman I'd occasionally spoken with, reached out to me privately that evening. "I had no idea about your background," he admitted. "I think Karen's in over her head. The board is starting to realize it." I thanked him but kept my reply measured. I wasn't interested in a vendetta. I wanted accountability and change. By now, the tide was beginning to turn. Karen's arrogance was isolating her, and her assumption that she could steamroll another family with her usual tactics was unraveling. Yet she remained defiant, blind to the precarious ground she was standing on. I knew the next move had to be more public. It was time for the community to learn who exactly she had chosen to challenge, and why this time the rules she loved to wield wouldn't protect her. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, as if the air itself were waiting for the next act in this quiet drama. The HOA had scheduled an emergency meeting for that evening, an unusually swift response that signaled they were feeling the heat. The invitation had been emailed to all residents, citing a need to address recent concerns regarding playground use and community policy enforcement. It was a thinly veiled attempt to frame the issue as procedural, but I knew better. The board was scrambling. I arrived early, not out of strategy, but habit. Years in public service had taught me that presence mattered. A few neighbors glanced my way as I entered the community center, polite smiles mixed with curiosity. Word had begun to spread. Some likely knew by now who I was beyond my role as Lily's mother. The whispers from the board meeting, combined with the precision of my legal letter, had started pulling back the curtain. Karen entered minutes later, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, clipboard in hand. Her expression was fixed, tight-lipped and defiant. If she was rattled, she hid it well. The board members filed in behind her, their body language less composed. Some avoided eye contact with me entirely. When the meeting was called to order, the board president opened with the expected platitudes about fairness and community harmony. Then Karen was given the floor. She launched into a practiced speech about the importance of maintaining standards and applying rules equally. Her voice rang with forced conviction, but there was a nervous edge beneath it. She was trying to reclaim control. When she finished, the board president cleared his throat and turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I rose, calm and steady. "Thank you, I do." I began by reiterating the facts. My daughter's disability, the protections afforded under federal law, and the events that had transpired. I spoke plainly, letting the truth speak for itself. But as I neared the end of my statement, I paused briefly, meeting the eyes of the room. "For those who may not be aware," I continued, voice clear, "I serve as a United States Senator. Advocacy for the rights of disabled individuals is not only a personal matter for me, it is a professional one as well. I am deeply familiar with the legal frameworks at play here, and I will pursue every necessary avenue to ensure my daughter and any child in this community is treated with dignity and fairness." The silence that followed was palpable. Karen's composure faltered for the first time. The color drained slightly from her face, and her gaze flickered downward. The board members shifted uncomfortably, understanding the gravity of the situation. I sat down without further comment. There was no need to embellish. The room had heard what needed to be heard. The balance of power had shifted. Now the board and Karen would have to decide what kind of community they truly wanted to be. The days that followed the meeting unfolded like the breaking of a long-held dam. By the next morning, word of my statement had spread well beyond the confines of the HOA meeting room. Neighbours I'd barely spoken to approached me with words of support and quiet apologies for not stepping in sooner. The private Facebook page that Karen once ruled had turned into a groundswell of dissent. Residents began openly questioning not only her actions toward Lily, but the broader pattern of pettiness and exclusion that had defined her tenure on the board. An emergency vote was called by several board members to formally review Karen's conduct. The tone of the community had shifted decisively. What had once been whispered grievances were now loud, unified voices calling for accountability. It was clear that the board, concerned about potential legal liability and public embarrassment, could no longer shield her. Karen, for her part, tried to fight back. She posted long defenses online, claiming she was being unfairly targeted and insisting she had acted within her rights. But the more she spoke, the more isolated she became. The apology the board issued was swift and unequivocal. The fine against Lily was not only rescinded, but the board publicly acknowledged that it had been issued in clear violation of federal law. Facing mounting pressure and a loss of confidence, Karen was asked to resign. A week later, she quietly stepped down from the board, her once firm grip on the community shattered. Through it all, I kept my focus where it belonged, on Lily. When we next visited the playground, it was without fear or tension. Lily beamed as she rolled to her favorite spot beneath the oak tree. Around us, neighbors smiled and nodded warmly. The space, like our hearts, had been reclaimed. In the weeks that followed, life in our community settled into a new rhythm. The playground once again became a place of joy for all children, including those like Lily, who experienced the world a little differently. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now greeted us warmly. Some stopped to chat or asked how Lily was doing. A few even admitted with quiet shame that they had long been afraid to stand up to Karen, but had drawn strength from seeing someone finally confront her. It was a small but meaningful shift, proof that even entrenched systems of control could be challenged and changed. For Lily, the transformation was even more profound. She no longer hesitated when asking to go to the playground. The fear and confusion that had clouded her after that day gradually faded, replaced by a renewed sense of belonging. Watching her smile beneath the oak tree, her fingers once again exploring her sensory toys with calm delight, was a moment I would carry in my heart forever. No child should have to fight for the right to play. No parent should have to wage battles for basic dignity, yet here we were, one victory hard won. As for me, the experience left its own mark. In the Senate, I often spoke about justice, equality, and the protection of the vulnerable. But it is one thing to craft legislation from the marble halls of Washington, and another entirely to witness how easily the spirit of those laws can be eroded by the small tyrannies of everyday life. Karen had not seen Lily as a child or me as a mother. She had seen an obstacle to her illusion of control, and in doing so, she had exposed the thin line between order and oppression. I thought often about the importance of speaking up, not only when it is easy or safe, but especially when it is not. Too many parents in too many communities face similar battles without the privilege of legal knowledge or public stature. If my role allowed me to shed even a small light on that struggle, then this ordeal had served a greater purpose. Karen's downfall was not something I celebrated. I took no joy in watching her lose her position or the esteem of her neighbors. I had not set out to ruin her life, only to protect my daughter's right to live hers without fear. But justice, when pursued with clarity and conviction, often carries consequences. In the end, Karen had to reckon with the reality that no one is above the law, not even self-appointed enforcers of petty rules. One quiet Sunday morning, weeks after the dust had settled, Lily and I returned to the playground once more. The sun warmed the rubber mat beneath her wheels as she laughed softly, lost in her own world of play. I sat nearby, watching with a heart full of gratitude. The path to that moment had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. As I looked around the now vibrant space, filled with children of all abilities and backgrounds, I understood something even deeper. Communities are defined not by their rules, but by how they treat those who are most vulnerable. In standing up for my daughter, I had stood up for something larger, an idea of fairness, of empathy, of true community. And as I watched Lily's smile light up the morning, I knew we had won something far more lasting than any policy change or public apology. We had reclaimed her joy, her place, and her right to simply be, and in that, there was no finer victory.